Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to get going with the work part of the workshop, and we're going to start with a series of lightning talks. So there's a couple of panelists up here who are going to give us a very quick overview, and Lisa's going to keep time so everyone's at 5 minutes. And then from there, we're going to transition into breakout groups and look at some of the areas which are dotted around. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daragh Byrne from CMU. Most of you either know me or probably have gotten an email off me in the last year or two. But before we get into the lightning talks, I wanted to give a little bit of context for why we're here today and what we're going to do in terms of the workshops. About a year and a half ago, a number of institutions got together and started a process to highlight the support among higher ed institutions for making in the nation. In the run-up to the first Maker Fair at the White House in June 2014, we had 153 schools sign on to a letter of support to President Obama, looking at the commitments they have in their own institutions for makers and making. And that included institutions of all shapes and sizes, from Research One universities, land grants, art and design programs, community colleges, and liberal arts schools as well. Since then, more and more universities, schools, and colleges have come to making and are coming to support their makers on their campuses, from grassroots efforts of students, faculty, and staff to incredibly well-resourced and well-funded institutional efforts. The one thing that's clear, and particularly from the group of people that we have here today, is that everyone has their own flavor of making, and it's creating incredible opportunities for research, innovation, and teaching on our campuses. But I think we all recognize that it's not easy. It's very different from the traditional infrastructure for education and training, and it comes with new technical, instructional, and organizational overheads for our institutions, for our faculty, for our staff, and for our students. But one of the biggest problems, and the thing that we hear time and time again from all of the institutions that we work with, is that we're doing this alone. We're trying to solve all these challenges independently. We're working at our institutions and not really getting the stuff back out. The insights and opportunities that we're creating on our campuses are largely undocumented, unshared, and going missed by the wider community. And that's why we're here today. Some of these opportunities to come together as a community and talk about these challenges in a very connected, together approach are captured in the State of Making report, particularly at the end. Everyone should have a copy on their tables, and I'd encourage you to take a look at it. In preparing for today's meeting as well, we also reached out to a broader network of institutions. The State of Making report looks at 40 profiled institutions as part of the Make Schools Alliance from last summer. But we also reached out to all of the institutions who signed that letter of support to ask them two very pointed questions about the conversation we should have today. What are the immediate needs or pressing concerns to grow making on your campus? And how could Make Schools help? How might we as a community better support your making at your institution and your makers? And we got tons of responses around concerns around setting up spaces, facilities, resources, understanding the role of making as a component of a broad curriculum, unification and avoiding siloing within institutions, support for managerial decision-making and day-to-day operations, trying to convert talk both nationally and within the institution into action, providing training for the students so they can not just work in the spaces, but work safely and appropriately there, forming good curricula and good projects for students, finding the right people to collaborate with and to get support from, tracking and sharing data for use in demonstrating value to the administration and the leadership of our institutions, assessment of the programs, spaces, and the ideas that we're putting into place, and providing suggestions for how we can utilize both on-campus and off-campus spaces. How can we connect the broader community around our institutions and move beyond the wall to have engagement in a very nice way? We're going to hear more about each of these topics soon. Our speakers are going to address some of these. But my favorite suggestion of what we should do as a community is simply be louder. And that's exactly what we're going to try and do today. Be loud about the things that we need. Be loud about our priorities for making and how we elevate making on our campus. we're going to try and transform the commitments that we've all put into play in our institutions into action by the end of this workshop. Something that we can all do together as a community to advance making in our institutions at a national level, and particularly with the focus of moving towards next year's week of making in June. What can we come together as a community to be loud about, to do together, and to elevate making? So, with that in mind, we have a small task for you as we're going through the talks here today. We're going to give you an index card, and we'd like you to note down one challenge that you think is particularly important for your institution, but you also believe other institutions are facing. So as you hear the talks today, note that one thing down, put your name on it and your email address, and we'll revisit it as we close out today's session. So, without further ado, and with Lisa on point, I'm going to turn over to our panelists, and we're going to hear a little bit about the topics that we're going to discuss in the breakout sessions. Okay? Who's up first?
All right, that would be me.
Okay.
Okay. So you just want a synopsis, or are we going to run through the slides? Run through the slides, all right. All right, mine's ready to go. Oh, good. So my name is Marty Culpepper. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. The last year and a half, I've been tasked with being the point person on our campus for trying to make our maker system better, and then also do outreach, starting to do outreach to people outside of MIT. What I'm going to talk about today are the two challenges that we have. There's forming maker spaces, which everybody here is interested in, but we've also recognized within inside MIT and then some of our peers, maker systems are important too, right? So after you get your maker systems ready to go, then you're going to have to necessarily have systems, and so you need to be ready to handle those things as well. Now, this is the MIT seal, and you can probably recognize there's the theory guy and then the Smith guy, right? So the scholar and the Smith. And MIT's always had this culture of doing theory and simultaneously doing hands-on education. So as a result of that, what we find on our campus is that we have over 130,000 square feet of design and build space. To put that in perspective, that's a little over 2 football fields worth of space. Why is that important challenge-wise? Well, if you look at a map of MIT and you try to see where all these different spaces are, what's shown on this map is actually only about half of the spaces that we have. So each one of these spaces is about 1,000 to 3,000 square feet of places where students, faculty, staff come to build things. We started doing an assessment on our system, and you'll notice the color coding. Red are spaces that are difficult to get into, yellow, sort of difficult, and then green are easy to get into. All right? What we found is that we have a lot of space, and I've talked with our peer universities, and they're finding the same things too. A lot of space for students to do things, but the accessibility is one of the key challenges, right? And those challenges come about because of some of the boundary conditions that we have on the bottom of the slide. So either students just don't know where things are at, they have trouble figuring out how to pay for things. Are they trained to get into particular spaces? Do they have permission to be in particular spaces, all right? So we've taken the time to go through and categorize the different boundaries that we have, vetted those against other schools, and then when we talk to other schools and advise them on how to set up their maker systems, these are the things that we talk to them about. Say, these are the things to be aware of, these boundaries, and then this is how you start to deal with them. Now, at the same time, we dug a little bit deeper. There's a bar graph here, and what we found is in academic settings, there are 3 kinds of spaces. There are machine shop type spaces, where basically you go to build something of very fine, high fidelity, accurate to microns. There are project spaces where you hold classes and kids build stuff. And then there are these open spaces like maker spaces where you can go and basically do anything that you want. It turns out that the open maker spaces, those end up being the places that are easy to get into. All right? MIT's legacy of learning to do things in your research and your class projects has led to the infrastructure where we've got a lot of shop and project space. We're seeing this at our other, at our peer universities as well. So we're building new spaces on campus right now, and we are targeting those to be open access spaces, all right? You can come and do anything that you want, all right? A lot of our peers are doing that as well. That's being done here at Case Western, some of the other schools. And our philosophy at MIT is this is what we're gonna do, all right? In the box that's our campus, we have all these different maker spaces. We're building one bigger space on the West Campus that is engineering and technical specific, and then one space on the East Campus that is centered around entrepreneurship and innovation. And then we're forming all these guys into networks where people can basically be able to go through and use any of the spaces that they want without the boundaries that they find due to the siloing effect that you find within a lot of schools. At the same time, we're working outside of the boundaries where if a student has to 3D print something, it's the 100th thing that they've 3D printed as a senior. Are they really going to learn anything from that? We want to reserve our spaces within inside of the campus mostly for learning. So we're forming partnerships with people in local communities that do 3D printing, CNC machining. So if a student needs to get something built and they're not going to learn anything from it, they can just port that out and have it back 2 days later. Be assured that it'll be made right. And then there's also partnering up with other universities. Metal 3D printers would be great things to have, but they're very expensive. So what we're doing is developing software that will allow our students to understand what we have internally within the university and be able to look into other universities so we can share resources between them. As part of this activity, I called together a group of people from our peer universities to sit down and talk about the common issues that we have. So it was very much like the call that went out for this, this conference here. We elected at the end of that, we said people need to know how to build their own makerspaces, so we're writing a book, Makerspace 101. All right, and that should be done sometime mid-next year. And then we're also looking at what's the right way to get a national conference set up so that people from year to year can learn how to do new things. Now, in addition to this, there's an app, and if people are interested in this app, I've been given $1.5 million to develop the app and all the systems around it internally within MIT, and then to share that and the book and the conference with other schools. All right. This app takes care of all of these things that tend to form boundaries that prevent people from being able to get access to different makerspaces inside of a university. It'll have credentials so that people can see you've been trained in different places. It'll allow people to schedule time on machines, and it'll also allow the students to pay for things if they need to. So I'm going to stop with that and just mention we are building a space that's actually similar to what you have, what the Case Western folks have here, and they've been great actually in advising us and helping us out as well as with other peer universities. I think you're calling me on my time. Okay, all right.
Oh, several slides in advance. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Peterson, and I'm an assistant director of admissions at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'm dealing one lower level down the pipeline than Marty, so the students that he's educating are the students that I'm helping to admit. I oversee the recruitment and evaluation of our top academic and technical talent, and that includes overseeing our maker portfolio, which is a supplement that we designed a few years ago. Now, how many people here are involved in enrollment management in some capacity? I'm not actually sure who's in the audience. No one, great. None of you can call me on my bullshit. How many of you have a kid or know a kid or care about a kid who's somewhere close to the college admissions game? All right, so this hopefully will be relevant for you. So what you basically need to understand is that we have been trying to do very pragmatically and operationally in our office how to evaluate, assess, and admit and enroll these sorts of types of students. So for a long time, MIT has been admitting really technically capable students who love building things. You can see on one of our dormitories, students every fall will build this huge roller coaster on campus. They can't call it a roller coaster because that's regulated by the state and it's an amusement park, so you'll see that they have no fun, science only, down here in the middle. And our applicants make a lot of great things, from apps to sort of Etsy projects and one thing or another. But the problem is that when they come into our application system, when they confront their application, it really hasn't changed that much from what the application looked like in 1915. Because this is what it looked like in 1915, and this is what it looks like in 2015. And how do you get those sorts of projects into this sort of form so that somebody like me can evaluate it? This is particularly poignant when you get to the activities section, because like, how do you put, your app or your roller coaster or, your knit little cute forest creatures into this sort of application? The answer, it turned out, was sort of already in front of us, because we already have a well-developed portfolio system for supplemental modes of creative expression in our art portfolio, in our music portfolio, and so on and so forth. These are some self-portraits that were taken by an application last year that was submitted by a 21-year-old jar of milk that lives in an MIT undergraduate dormitory. So here's how the process works. We have a maker portfolio that goes through our slide room system. It's the same portfolio partner that's used by the college board and the Common App and so on and so forth. It gets routed to members of an engineering advisory board who are members of the faculty and instructional They evaluate it, they send the evaluation back to us, we look at it in the rest of the case. So there's 3 areas that students are reviewed upon: technical skill, creative ingenuity, and potential impact on campus. They're compared against the baseline of MIT student work, so we can basically understand, with so many highly qualified applicants, how well are these students doing overall, and how special are they in our very, very, very strong pool. And the engineering advisory board members also have to justify their evaluations. I'm speaking very quickly because we don't have that much time, but I'll be by the admissions thing later on. So this is what it looks like. Here's a maker portfolio from Valerie, who applied and was admitted to MIT last year. She's written some narratives about the chessboard that she's made and submitted some pictures of this thing that she sort of wood-shopped and why she liked it, and the background and the game and everything else. And we'll read that and we'll look at it and we'll try to assess it on these different characteristics. So the maker portfolio is a tool that allows us to help students express a mode of technical creativity in the same way that they express musical creativity or artistic creativity or other modes of human expression. It's not a golden ticket. About 18,000 students apply to MIT every year. About 10,000 can do the work. Our hard work is in narrowing that down to the students we're going to actually admit, and this is a way that some students can give us a compelling reason to admit them. So this is what the numbers looked like last year. Like I said, about 18,000 students applying, about 1,000 portfolios submitted, and we admitted some of the students who submitted portfolios, including some of the students who did really well in the portfolio process. Challenges. There's a lot of information on this slide. Here's what I'll tell you. Women submit maker portfolios at a significantly lower rate than men. It is the only portfolio for which they do so. Women apply to MIT less overall. They're very self-selecting. They're very strong. Very, very, very few of them submit maker portfolios. This is especially true when you intersect with other areas of socioeconomic diversity. When you go to applicants who come from racial or ethnic backgrounds that are historically underrepresented in STEM, read Black, Latino, Latina, or Native, it's only 6%, and only 11 total women who came from underrepresented backgrounds submitted maker portfolios to MIT last year. Same when you get to first generation of college students or students who are low SES. Why? What's blocking the pipeline? Is it because they don't have the means? Is it because they don't identify with the identity? We don't know. We're still looking for solutions. We also, we have this problem where students are never quite sure how to submit their creative expression that's non-standard into a standardized process, and how we should be evaluating that. And recruiting and managing these sorts of volunteers is always pragmatically difficult. With that said, it's been also some key successes for us in terms of helping us bring rigor to a process that was completely ad hoc, and giving more confidence in our admissions decisions, which are largely made by non-technical lay people. That is a rapid overview of everything that we do in my office. I'm more than happy to talk to any about you. We got 1,300 applications dropped on us today for early, so as soon as I get back from Cleveland, I'm going to start reading some more. Thank you all.
So hi, I'm Aubrey Wigner. I'm actually a PhD student at Arizona State University, and my team's research focuses on understanding maker education pathways. We kind of look at the meta picture above what any individual maker is doing. So as you can see from this graphic, there's a lot going on in how makers are learning. Everything from mentorship to classes, YouTube to breaking things, makers learn in a variety of methods and in a variety of spaces. So when we talk about making, a lot of times we focus on the first and last items on this list. How will students fit in, and what will our brand new shiny makerspace look like? I'm sure that from the other presentations you've seen this week, it's clear that nothing is as simple as that, and existing faculty and teachers, accreditation standards, and program elements, both formal and informal, will all play deeply into maker education. So briefly, I'd like to talk about the previous areas, problems, and possible solutions. So the incoming students of the future include many makers, and this is an example of 4 young makers we've interviewed at maker fairs. Now, these young makers present at Maker Faire, win local artisan fairs, intern at Intel, and sell their own line of educational making materials. They demand that making is part of their future education, so keep them in mind, but we talk about them a lot. Now, traditionally faculty, at least in engineering where my main focus is, they tend to be deeply siloed in their fields. Furthermore, they have established ideas of what constitutes valid knowledge. So making is not generally considered deep knowledge by engineering faculty. So part of it is we have to figure out what the language of that is and what the valuation of knowledge is if we want to convert what making is to something that engineers value. Teaching making doesn't usually require or equal more funding, it doesn't usually equal more publications, and it doesn't give you a higher chance of getting tenure. So our incentives for teaching making for early faculty are really out of whack, so we need to figure out how we might adjust that. So part of how excellence in engineering programs is determined is through accreditation, specifically ABET. I'm currently looking at what makers are learning and comparing them to ABET standards, and not just their A through K broad standards, but also individual program standards, so we can say, here's what makers are learning. Here's what adult makers are learning, and here's what young makers are learning. To give us an idea of how to speak the language of accreditation to really get making accepted as educationally valid. So our existing classes are focused on a couple issues: being easily testable and gradable, serving many students, and being reasonably affordable. And it's important to remember that making is expensive, it's time-consuming, and it's challenging to grade. So there are reasons perhaps not everything would be converted to making. If you want to serve 500 students and give them some knowledge, there are reasons we have the existing program we do. That's not to say it's perfect, but keep those reasons in mind if you want to change this system. You have to understand why people do what they do in the way that it exists. Briefly, at ASU, we have a variety of spaces. I'm going to skip on this slide because the spaces group is going to do great work for you over in the design space. I did want one takeaway. A makerspace is not some sort of field of dreams analog. So building a space in no way ensures that they will come to it. You have to look at broader issues if you want to get the outcomes you're focused on. And the group over at MR2 is going to, once again, do an awesome job in the space category on that. So when we consider training for makerspaces, we often forget that faculty are a big part of this. And so inspiring faculty to embrace making is about speaking their language, finding out what they value for their students, and furthermore, you can't just jump in and teach making. Hands-on project-based learning and how to teach it is a skill. So one of the things we'll talk some over at curriculum with is how do you train your trainers to teach making? How do you convince them of the value and go from there? So let's see, I'm going to skip ahead here and just real quick talk about adding making to existing courses with a couple examples. So the Castellea School, which is a private all-women's school in the Bay Area, incorporates making with their education. And this was through a top-down directive from the principal who said, look, existing courses, you have to use our makerspace. Existing makerspace, you have to justify yourself by working with courses. So for biology, their students build joints, articulate them, build their own microscopes to better understand science. And for history, in their history class, they consider who's a great woman in history and how can we build a monument for her. They then build a model monument and have to think not just about the technical skills, but also what are we going to memorialize. So once again, over in curriculum, we're going to talk some about this. How might you incorporate making in existing courses to have greater impact? At the Polytechnic campus, to make things short, we do weird stuff like design for aliens, and we also include design from the very first class in your freshman year all the way through your senior design finishing. Thank you very much. That's it.
Hello. Let me see if I can figure out which button to press. It is that one. My name is Ian Charnas. I manage ThinkBox, a makerspace and innovation center here at Case Western Reserve University. We are free and open to the public. Wow. So we get 3,000 to 4,000 visits a month. That is a lot. That kind of throughput has forced us to seriously consider the issue of training and the challenges of training, and I was asked today to share a few of the lessons we learned, or more specifically, the challenges we ran into, and we're going to be going over some of the solutions later on in the design session. As any shop manager will tell you, the kind of throughput that we're seeing comes with a lot of unique challenges. So what is it about training that makes it a difficult process? The easiest challenge for anyone to understand is resource restrictions. It takes time to properly train people. And the more people using the shop, the less time with each student any shop instructor will have. Training someone to use a mill or a drill press is a lot different than training someone in how to do a calculus problem. Why is that? Well, you can have an auditorium of hundreds of students, and you can do a fantastic job, and our faculty do, in teaching calculus. Not so with a drill press or a MIG welder. Students really need to develop that muscle memory with all of the levers and the buttons and the dials. They need to do that themselves. They can only do that if they're the ones running the machines. Now, if you had a separate drill press and welder for every student, you would have no problem at all. The issue is that machine shops in general are only going to have one or a few of each machine, so there's a resource constraint at play. You can only train so many students at once. If there's only one mill, you're not going to train 50 students or even 5 students on how to use it at the same time. Another challenge we ran into unexpectedly is the issue of assumed knowledge when instructing. If someone is following a tutorial and it says to go to the tool cart and get a burnisher or an adjustable wrench or an Allen key, and they don't know what that is, it can be very demotivational for both the instructor and the student. Students used to learn these things at home or in middle school or high school, but as we know, machine shops have been disappearing from those venues for some time. It's difficult as a higher ed instructor to not rely on certain bits of background knowledge, such as how to measure things or what the basic tools are called. To continue with the analogy in mathematics, if you're familiar with teaching a Calculus 2 class, you can rely on the fact that your students should, at least they were taught, what the basics were in Calculus 1. In the shop, we don't currently have that luxury. If you're training someone on how to use a laser cutter, you really have no idea if they're familiar from the get-go with measurement tools, design tools, or if they can even tell the difference between what's metal and what's plastic. It's that fundamental. So needing to fill in those seemingly random bits of background knowledge can really derail the training experience. Psychology comes into play in almost anything you can do. Any instructor out there, have you had that experience of explaining something to a student and having them nod their head yes and saying they understand, and you can tell they don't, but they're just afraid to admit it? Psychology. Some students have used a shop at home or at another school, and they may have picked up bad habits, especially when it comes to safety. They will try unsafe things because they don't realize they're unsafe. At a certain age, perhaps we can all look back to, we were invincible, weren't we? Students will forget to take off rings or jewelry or earbuds because they didn't do that at home, and they aren't old enough to have seen injuries for those sorts of things. They might try to mill with a drill press and end up hurting the bearings or breaking the bit or hurting themselves. Finally, once we do get through training, although you may have only shown one setup on a drill press, folks can end up thinking that they're journeyman machinists and end up trying unsafe procedures because of the confidence they built up during the guided exercises. Shop classes generally only have time to train students in the general use of the machines, even though students will end up doing very specific projects with very specific setups. Truly mastering something means always being open to learning new things, and that's a personality trait that not everyone has. Another topic. I've been very fortunate, I'll say, to have the full support of our school and university leaders here at Case Western, but another issue my colleagues at other universities report is frustrating stories of politics and bureaucracy. This can manifest in a number of different ways. It could manifest as a lack of funds to support staff or student workers. It could be a university where they send students to the machine shop to work on a project without allowing the instructor the time to properly train the students. It could be a health and safety department where they have no staff specifically experienced with machine shops who issue confusing or even counterproductive edicts, which shop managers must follow, even against their own experience and wisdom. Many management books will tell you, talk to the people doing the work at the ground floor. They'll usually know more about the intricacies of the logistics than the folks at the very top, and they'll be able to offer solutions to the challenges that respect all the constraints. In preparing this list, I had a lot of help from colleagues at other universities through the Society of Academic Workshops. As I wrap up, I wanted to thank them for our email discussion and encourage any makerspace managers out there in the audience to consider joining this list. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Schneider from Cornell University. I would like to basically talk about this larger topic of assessment. Now, we could spend a lot of time talking about assessment. There's a lot of places to start that conversation, but I'd like to relate it back to some of the things that you've heard already today, actually, particularly focusing on maker portfolios. One of the things you may have even seen in the MIT presentation there was the number that they had to go through, and they were still only at 10%, not less than 10%, right, of their portfolios. So the question that might even be one way to begin this conversation is, well, not go backwards, is to simply the idea of there's too many portfolios at every institution to assess. Because imagine, again, you have X number of applicants, but chances are as well, those same students are applying to more than one college. Good chance with regards to that. And you know what? We already kind of have a way of working with each other when you think about it, because we would accept Physics 101 transfer credit from each other, right? And so you might start to ask the question, why wouldn't we accept portfolio assessment from each other? Again, this is just one way that we start to think about the problem overall, but we can follow this kind of train of thought overall with regards to how the conversation's been going on. Say, okay, great. Well, if we accepted transfer credit from somebody else as part of it, we'd want to know how they assess things. So it means that we need to have transparency in our assessment rubrics. This isn't only good for ourselves, but also good for that high school teacher, right? That wants to actually, help their students to make better portfolios. So this sounds good, but again, it gets to the notion of, wow, this is a lot of work. Still do, because the question is, who's actually going to create these transparency rubrics as a part of it? Again, is this something that every institution should actually be doing on their own? Well, maybe instead of having every institution do it, we should actually try to learn from each other in some way, and maybe there'd be some kind of example guidelines or even baselines for this. Wouldn't that be fantastic if we were able to do that? But be even, again, I do want to make the point that I'm not talking about making a separate Common Core or NGSS for making with regards to this. I do believe that making can be a good argument for meeting those requirements. But again, we're looking here at guidelines such that, again, everyone can do their own thing in the same way that maybe everyone runs their own physics class that they have here. But those guidelines can be very valuable because not only for us, but again for those outside teachers as a part of this. But then we get back to, again, this question of who's actually going to make them? Which is, again, part of the reason why we're talking about community things and hoping to ignite this community here around this idea. Well, there are actually some groups that are working on this. You heard about, MIT's obviously got some of theirs as well. But there's also been a group I've been working with Daragh here as well from Carnegie Mellon, and some of the folks actually from Maker Ed as a part of this, thanks to actually an effort that Stephanie helped happen at the White House. So it is possible, and yes, we have actually been doing some work in this area towards trying to develop different kinds of rubrics and going into a lot of neat detail with regards to these. Again, this doesn't mean that it has to be done for everyone, but man, it'd be a heck of a lot easier for my university to create this if I had at least something to go off of to start this out. And again, that whole idea of working with other peer institutions to help create the proper environment or pressure within your own institution. So, and there's lots of different possible ideas for what to create this assessment around. And so this is not a small task by any means, and no one university could probably be the right one to do all of it. But when we look at this as well, one of the first questions that might even come from what Ian was talking about is, even if you had such guidelines, would you really feel comfortable with someone else using your equipment in your lab if someone else did that assessment as a possibility of that? So it brings up the idea, particularly obviously with safety issues, that there's a lot of different categories that are part of this. And again, the idea that there's a lot of work to be done with this. Even if we did have set guidelines, there's still one of the questions with regards to those guidelines as to when is this assessment actually going to occur? How are we going to actually implement this assessment that we have? Because again, even if we're using our local staff, that's time, and time is something that none of us have an excess of. So we also need to make sure that the work is actually of that applicant, that it's not just their, let's say even their they're the one student in a team, and it was all the team that did the work, or their mom and dad did the work for them. As a reviewer, actually even qualified for that. Going with that, how scalable is this overall? But we can take this from another perspective as well and say, all right. We also can think about the Maker 101 classes that we might have our own class for offering credit for those, and there's lots of different variations of this. In fact, some of these are existing classes that we had for a while and just rebranded with Making to infuse new energy as part of that. And so we recognize there's different categories that are already occurring at our universities, and we already have some kind of assessment in those communities as well that we're working with this. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some way that we had to actually share and evaluate our current mechanisms for this as a community once again, so that we can actually start to address these, and again, look to see how might those ideas be more scalable. And when you look at our notes overall, I know it's not a good idea for a professor to give out notes to students because they won't pay attention. Oh, I'm out of time. But the rough idea is you take a look at all these different things. These are really key things we need to make as a community. Here are some of the key questions I hope to talk with you over more in our breakout group as Key wants to stem from. But because we actually have had a way to accept each other's physics course 101, I have hope for a solution, that we can actually do this as a community together. Thank you very much.